You're tuned into the Spot-Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot-Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, it's trade deadline week in the NBA, looking at where the Spurs stand as Thursday's deadline approaches. Reviewing the Spurs going 2-1 in this past week. And also, Wemby was named the January Western Conference Defensive Player of the Month, and some updates on All-Star Weekend. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Spot-Up Pod. I do want to note that it is Tuesday evening, 8:45 p.m. Mountain Time. I want to put a timestamp of when I'm recording this episode in case there's a rumor concerning the Spurs or a trade goes down that I didn't address in this episode, and that's why you all know why. So again, I'm recording this Tuesday. Trade deadline's coming up here on Thursday at 2 p.m. Central Time in San Antonio. So what I want to do first is go through a recap of some of the rumors the Spurs have been involved in, and also just discuss some of the pieces I wrote with the trade deadline coming up this coming week on Thursday. And so I want to address these rumors that I hadn't discussed here on the Spot-Up Pod. So let's go back to a week ago. It was on a Tuesday. I wrote a piece. It was more so a recency piece because Saddiq Bey had played very well, and that Spurs lost to the New Orleans Pelicans. So I was like, Bey. Initially, when I did my trade player list for the Spurs, I didn't have Bey on there because I was mainly focusing on players with high volume three-point shooting and also good accuracy three-point shooting, at least over 35%. And so there, Bey does have like a decent, three-point volume. I think he's like at 5 threes per game. When I last looked up his numbers, I apologize, I didn't look them up for this episode. However, his accuracy was like at 33% at the time, so that's why I kept him off my list. Well, then I saw the things, he did against San Antonio. He's a big defender. You could either start him, you could have him come off the bench. He's having a really good season with the Pelicans this year. And so that's what I wrote about, was like looking at Bey as a trade fit. So I looked at some deals that might work for him. Basically, Jeremy Sochan for Saddiq Bey works straight up. It would be on the Pelicans. Do they want to take a risk on a chance on Sochan? Get a young player, only 22. Hope that he has a good second half of the season with them. If they like him, then they have his bird rights. They have the option, the ability to re-sign him in the offseason if there's interest between Sochan and New Orleans. And for the Spurs, of course, you get Bey, a good player who would be ready to contribute, a rotation player to their upcoming playoff run. And I also looked at, in that piece after I wrote about Bey, I discussed why I didn't think the Spurs were going to target players in this trade deadline with 2 or 3 years left on their deals. And mainly there's a few reasons for that I explained. One is Carter Bryant's projected role for next season. So I know that, it looks like the Spurs do need another like 4 kind of player, a wing kind of player who can shoot, maybe has some size to help out on the boards. But we also have to keep in mind that that's going to probably be Carter Bryant's role coming up here in the next few years. I know this year, he's getting spot minutes. He may not be ready yet for the playoffs to get 15, 20 minutes a night, but I think in the coming years that will be his role. And so I think maybe that's why the Spurs don't really go for a forward at this trade deadline, because they kind of want that to be Carter Bryant's spot going into the future. I also wrote about how a lot of players' extensions are coming up, so we know that in the offseason coming up, De'Aaron Fox's max extension will kick in this coming summer. Then Victor Wembanyama has a chance to extend this coming summer at the 25% extension for max extension for him. And then, that could potentially go up to 30% in future years, even though Wemby's extension wouldn't start this summer, it would start the following summer. And then, of course, after Wemby, it's going to be Stephon Castle coming up for an extension. So that's why I looked at, if the Spurs do swing for a trade, I don't know if they target players with 2 or 3 years on their deals, just because of all those different issues with Carter Bryant's role, with Fox, Wemby, Castle's extensions coming up in the next 2 to 3 years. And then also, do the Spurs want to hold on to their good first round picks or pick swaps that they have right now and just wait to see, go into the playoffs, see how they perform, see how they finish, what are their team needs, and then, if there's a star out there that they need to add to their team or a really good role player, and they need to have some of those good first round picks to get that player, well, then they've saved those picks and not given them away here at this deadline. So again, that was the piece I wrote about on Tuesday evening this past week. And then it was, of course, this is what happens during trade rumor season. As soon as I hit publish, so if you subscribe to the Spot-Up Shot newsletter, you saw my little ping, come to your email or the notification on your phone, new piece from the Spot-Up Shot. And then, right after that, I get one myself because I'm subscribed to Mark Stein's newsletter and Jake Fisher. And Mark Stein publishes a piece. And of course, he has some Spurs related notes in there. And so, as soon as that happens, I was like, oh, great. So then, I updated my piece. And so one of the interesting things that Stein said was that in that initial piece on Tuesday was that Jeremy Sochan and his representation have received permission from the Spurs to start exploring some trades with other teams, to possibly get Sochan on a new team before Thursday's deadline. And he also added that the New Orleans Pelicans might be open to moving Trey Murphy III or Herb Jones if they got a Desmond Bane type package. So, the Sochan news wasn't too shocking. Obviously, we know that he's been out of the rotation, even though he's been healthy for most of the season. And, it just doesn't look like, ever since he and the Spurs did not agree on to an extension in October, it didn't look like he was going to be part of the rotation or part of the future. And so it's not as surprising that he's sought permission from the Spurs to go out and maybe find a new team via trade. So that part to me wasn't too surprising. The real interesting part to me that night was the fact that Murphy might be available, because obviously, if you listen to the Spotted Pod, you've read my work. You know that I've been a big fan of Trey Murphy possibly coming to the Spurs because, the Spurs have reportedly had interest in him, and I really think he'd just be the perfect fit there in the starting four for San Antonio. And so the thing about what Stein wrote was that, they, maybe New Orleans is open to a Desmond Bane type package. Well, that's a lot for Trey Murphy. That Bane went for 4 first-round picks to the from Memphis to Orlando and a pick swap. So that's a lot of draft assets. So that evening, I started putting together Trey Murphy packages, and I wrote about that over on the Spot Up Shot. One thing to remember, though, and I was informed by this by a reader, and I'm glad he really pointed this out to me, was that the stepping role is going to impact the Spurs at this trade deadline if they want to try to give have to put up multiple first-round picks in this coming trade deadline. So basically, the stepping rule, the best way I can just kind of quickly explain it is you basically have to have a first-round pick in every other year. So, or like in the 2-year window, you always have to have a first-round pick. And so the Spurs, they do have 7 first-round picks in the next 7 years, but because of the stepping rule, they cannot trade all of them at this deadline. They have to. The most they can trade is 3 first-round picks, according to Brian Windhorst. Got that information from Bobby Marks, and so that's why. That's why it's important to note that if the Spurs are going to go for one of those big trades or a splashy trade here at this deadline, they don't have a lot of draft assets to work with in terms of the first-round picks. They can only trade 3 of those first-round picks here at this deadline, and then maybe the summer they have the ability to move a few more. But they do have a ton of second-round picks. They have 15 second-round picks, and so I want to give credit to the reader who mentioned this too, that the Spurs could, it's a lot of work on their part, but if they really wanted to get creative, they could, send, multiple seconds to a team that has a bunch of first, maybe like 3 to 4, and then see if that team would give them another first. And then if they can accumulate a bunch of first, then they have a better package to send to New Orleans if they had interest in trying to go and get Trey Murphy at this deadline. Again, I don't think San Antonio is going to be that urgent at this deadline. I think they kind of want to see what they have with their team, see how they finish in the playoffs. But you also never know because of what happened on Tuesday. On Tuesday, we saw a former 2-time All-Star and former Defensive Player of the Year player Jaren Jackson Jr. get moved to the Utah Jazz for just 3 first-round picks. And I know that the Grizzlies also got a young player in Walter Clayton Jr. in that deal. But again, the fact that Jackson Jr. only who was it? Memphis only got 3 first-round picks for Jackson Jr. You have to wonder now how the Pelicans are viewing Murphy at this deadline. Do they have to come down on their price? Other teams could say, hey, look, Jaren Jackson Jr., who's been an All-Star, done a lot more at this stage already in his NBA career. Why did he only get 3 first-round picks and you all want 4 first-round picks and a pick swap? The Desmond Bane package. So maybe the Pels are willing to come down in their asking price for Murphy, or maybe they're just going to see that Jackson went for 3 first, and so maybe that kind of sets the market for those really good players, and so maybe they just hold off until the summer, and that way they see which teams lost, and then maybe those teams want to come after Murphy again when they have more draft assets available. So again, that it does make it interesting, the fact that Jackson today, Jaren Jackson Jr., went for 3 first-round picks and a young player on a rookie contract. So again, maybe who knows how that impacts New Orleans. So regarding Murphy III, as I wrote in that piece, at this deadline, it is kind of tough for San Antonio, depending on the amount of picks that the Pelicans want to get Murphy. Again, it just really comes down to how aggressive will the Spurs be in trying to get him, and then they would have to get super creative in trying to go out and get more first round picks. So again, it's just something to watch. You just never know with the fact that Jaren Jackson Jr. got moved today on Tuesday in a deal. Then on Wednesday, Michael Scott of Hoops Hype reported that the Spurs discussed a Guerschon Yabusele and Pacome Dadiate deal for Jeremy Sochan with the New York Knicks, but San Antonio reportedly turned down that deal because Yabusele has a player option next season. So that was, again, interesting. That was one of the trades I did write about for Yabusele to come to the Spurs, would be him and Dadiate for Sochan, just because it works financially for both teams, especially the Knicks, who are right under the second apron hard cap, so they don't have a lot of leeway in terms of how they're going to figure out trades. But again, it's interesting that even with just 1 year left on his deal, not even at a lot, it's like 5.6, under $6 million for San Antonio reportedly said no, just because, again, are they wanting to watch their cap sheet for this upcoming summer, or is it more so, they don't want to take the risk with Yabusele, considering he's had a down season with the Knicks this year, and maybe, they're stuck with him if he ends up opting into his player option and he hasn't really, thrived, and they don't know for sure if he'll thrive in the second half of the season, despite his familiarity playing alongside Victor Wembanyama. So then in that piece that I wrote, I started looking at the players on my trade list who I thought were good fits with the Spurs, who have just one, who will be free agents this coming summer. So the three players left though from that list were Luke Kennard, Ayo Dosunmu from the Bulls, and then Keon Ellis. And we did find out that San Antonio had interest in Ellis. There was some reporting that came out that they were one of the teams with interest in Ellis, but Cleveland was able to acquire Ellis this past week from the Sacramento Kings. And so looking at the the fact that the Spurs might have said no to bringing in Yabusele because he has a player option next season, I kind of wanted to look at their financial situation going into next season in case they don't make any big moves or only make one move and that player becomes a free agent this summer. And so basically, the Spurs are projected to have 10 players on their roster next season, with the addition of the projected 13th pick in the lottery, which would be the Atlanta Hawks' current 2026 pick. And they'd still be above the cap team, but they would have access to the non-tax mid-level exception of $15 million to go out and sign free agents or trade for players, and also the $5.5 million biannual exception worth or to either, again, sign free agents or bring in players. So again, that's kind of the fact that they said no on Yabusele's extra year might be that they want to keep their cap sheet pretty clean, where they still have access to those two exceptions coming into the summer with 5 open roster spots. Then on Thursday, the Spurs continue to remain in the rumor mill. Will Guillory of the Athletic reported that the Spurs were among 2 other playoff teams, the New York Knicks and the Houston Rockets, with trade interest in Pelicans point guard Jose Alvarado. And so, I wrote about this over on spotupshot.com. I looked at the positives of adding Alvarado, a really kind of hounding kind of defender, known for his sneaky stealing ability on defense. Can he really, help apply full court pressure? Also a good spot up 3-point shooter, and also has a low usage on offense. I know he's a point guard, but he doesn't really have to bring the ball up a lot. So he could fit, next to Dylan Harper or Stephon Castle or De'Aaron Fox. He could fit in any lineups with those players. But again, I wasn't really looking at seeing that the Spurs needed point guards because they already have a bunch of guards on this team. And plus, with Alvarado, as good as he can be, with some of his positives on defense, in the half court, teams can start to target him, which makes the Spurs' defense stress out a little bit, where they have to kind of maneuver how they're going to recover and help out in case teams start targeting Alvarado on defense. And so again, and then also he doesn't get to the rim as much either. So again, that's why I didn't really look at smaller point guards from this upcoming trade deadline. But again, apparently the Spurs did have some interest in him. One package that does work, trade package, would be Sochan for Alvarado straight up, or the Spurs could acquire Alvarado into one of their exceptions, and then maybe send out like 3 first-round picks to him. 3 second-round picks for him. And so Alvarado does have a low contract at $4.5 million this season, and then next season he has a player option, again, same kind of in that same range. So again, I wasn't high on Alvarado coming to the Spurs, but I could see why they might have interest in him. Again, he would just help with that physicality, that quick, that full court pressure on defense, and just kind of be one of those energizer players alongside Keldon Johnson off the bench to kind of turn the team around if they're kind of coming out kind of lethargic in a game. Then on Friday and Saturday, I was able to sit down and write a piece I've been wanting to work on. So what I really wanted to do is, I know I've been talking about, if you've been reading my work or listening to Spotapod, I've been talking about a lot of trades that involve Jeremy Sochan for, players that can help the Spurs, players that fit with the Spurs. But I kind of want to look at this from Sochan's perspective, is like, the fact that the Spurs, gave him permission to go out and talk to other teams. Look at this from Sochan's angle. What are some of the teams where he would have a consistent role, where he could get some minutes, and maybe those teams could possibly, re-sign him in the summer if there's interest, considering they would have his bird rights. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do. Was I wrote down all 30 team rosters. I looked at, some of the power forward lineups, their depth chart for each team. And so I found, a number of teams. I found like 14 teams that Sochan I think would be a good fit on, but I found 5 specifically where I thought he could get some good minutes, and a good role and possibly a good future with these teams. So my top 5 teams that I landed on were the Phoenix Suns, the Kings, the Wizards, the Bucks, if they trade Giannis Antetokounmpo or Bobby Portis, and of course the Knicks. So just kind of, again, I wrote about it in more detail, but I'll just kind of give a rundown on each team. So reportedly, the Suns actually did have interest in Sochan. So the discussed package, I think this was by Michael Scotto, wrote that Sochan for Nick Richards was an idea kind of discussed, but this would take Phoenix further into the tax. So again, that even though Phoenix would like Sochan, maybe again it takes them into the tax. I also wonder too, with the Suns possibly being a team the Spurs might face in the playoffs, how much they want. They're a very good defense already against the Spurs, and so how much do they want to give another really good wing defender, forward defender, versatile defender like Sochan, out there alongside next to Ryan Dunn and Dylan Brooks. So again, maybe Phoenix isn't that team just considering, unless it's a really good return for the Spurs for Sochan. So again, and the fact that Phoenix would have to, their tax bill would increase a little bit more if they added Sochan for Richards. The Kings, I had them because I felt like there was some openings there, in the backup lineup behind Keegan Murray at forward for Jeremy Sochan, and especially that they're kind of like in a tank mode right now because of just how bad they've been this year. And it's just better for them to stay in tank mode and get the best pick they can. And, but with how active the Kings have been at this deadline, I just don't know now if he fits or what their direction is with their team. The Wizards, maybe they send the Spurs 2 or 3 seconds for Sochan, and again, that's a rebuilding situation for Sochan, where he'd be able to get in there now, finish out the second half of the season, either starting or coming off the bench, get a lot of minutes, and then if the Wizards like what they saw from him, if he likes what direction they're going in, he's still 22, so he could still be okay in a rebuilding situation like Washington. Then maybe those two teams could work out a deal. Sochan and Washington could work out a deal in the summer to re-sign. Again, the Bucks, if they end up moving Giannis or Bobby Portis, maybe that's a potential move there. As the Bucks start transitioning as well into rebuilding mode. Same situation. They can give Sochan some second half minutes, and then if they like him and he likes that situation, they could look at a deal in the summer. A deal that works with the Bucks is Sochan for Gary Trent Jr. works straight up. The Spurs get an extra shooter off the bench, even though Trent's not really having a good season. And then, of course, that Knicks deal got brought up again. But again, it's really tough if the Spurs don't want to take Yabusele's player option in that second year, because that's kind of the only one that I see financially that works, unless the Knicks get super creative and go move Yabusele and Dadier to another team, create a trade exception, and then bring in Sochan, but that just requires a lot more draft capital for them. And then for the New York too, it's like there's no guarantee Sochan's going to be that good for you right away in this season, considering he's on a current playoff team right now and he can't even get minutes with San Antonio. I also listed some other teams, like I said, 9 more teams in that list. And it's kind of hard right now to see which team Sochan fits on, just because of all the roster movement going on at the moment with all these trades that went down on Tuesday. So again, I think there's still a good chance he gets moved, but right now that's kind of was the intention of that piece, was kind of look at through Jeremy's situation, what's kind of one of the best places for him. And that's, again, if the Spurs don't get a rotation player for him, I think that's what they end up where they end up sending him, is somewhere where he can get some minutes, get a good role, and then be able to possibly re-sign this upcoming summer while getting maybe some draft capital for him, maybe 2 or 3 second round picks. Now, since those rumors on Saturday, there hasn't been much else about the Spurs or Sochan. One thing Jake Fisher did have, though, on Sunday was in a group chat over on his Substack chat with the Steinline. Someone asked him, if there's any interest coming in for Sochan as of Sunday afternoon. At that time, Fisher, who's very plugged into the league, all the trade stuff, he said he hadn't heard much inbound interest for Sochan as of Sunday afternoon. We'll see if that starts to heat up here with the trade deadline getting even closer. Now that it's already Tuesday evening. So my expectation going into this trade deadline, again, as of Tuesday evening, is I don't think the Spurs are going to go for a splashy kind of trade. I think they just make a small upgrade on the roster, maybe moving Sochan for a rotation player, like a shooter off the bench or forward. Same thing for Kelly Olynyk, maybe using his contract and bringing someone else in off the bench. Or if they can't get a rotation player, again, maybe just sending Sochan out and getting 2 or 3 second round picks for him, because there's a very good chance they end up he ends up walking in the summer if they don't re-sign him, which doesn't look like they will, considering they gave him permission to go talk to other teams. So again, I guess if I had to make a prediction, I do predict that Sochan will get traded before Friday. But again, I don't as of Tuesday evening, I don't think there's going to be a splashy move. Who knows, though? Like I said, the last 24 hours have been crazy in the NBA. All these trades are coming in, and so it would not surprise me. The fact that Jaren Jackson Jr. got traded on Tuesday, and also James Harden got traded out of nowhere, that came in on Monday night, those rumors. Who knows what could happen. So I'm not going to say, the Spurs won't. My prediction, just how I think everything's going to go, is they won't make a splashy move, but who knows at this point, because it's just been a wild last 24, 48 hours here at this trade deadline. All right, so let's just quickly go through the last 3 games for the Spurs in this past week. So let's go back to Wednesday. The Spurs are at Houston. playing the Rockets. The Rockets were favored by 2.5, being at home. The Spurs fell behind by double digits, by 16 points, but then they overcame them and ended up winning by 12 points going away in the fourth quarter. Wemby and Stephon Castle played some excellent defense in the second half, where the Spurs made an adjustment, having Victor guard Amen Thompson. So Victor basically patrolled the paint because he was going to go out and guard Thompson, from the perimeter, since he's not a shooter. And that allowed Stephon Castle to have his chance at guarding either Alperen Şengün or KD, and then the Spurs would bring in some help as well. And so Castle did a great job. Wemby did a great job. And so the Spurs really did well there in the fourth quarter. And so, some of the top players, Wemby ends up with 28 points, 16 rebounds, 5 blocks, 12 made free throws in this game. De'Aaron Fox ends up with 18 points, 5 rebounds, and 8 assists. And then Castle with 16 points, 5 rebounds, and 6 assists for San Antonio. And the one thing we saw San Antonio do with Steven Adams out, for Houston, and the fact that they're starting Alperen Şengün now, and KD there and Jabari Smith Jr. is that the paint, San Antonio just living in the paint, just attacking it nonstop, and a lot of their players had double digits scoring nights here there in the paint against Houston. Then on Saturday, the Spurs were on the road at Charlotte. This game was did take place earlier because Charlotte was going through like a snowstorm. So the Spurs were favored by 3.5, even though the Hornets had been rolling. They had been playing very good basketball. And so the Hornets, led early, led by as many as 20 points. The Spurs got the game close, got it all the way down to crunch time. On one of their final possessions, though, Victor took a quick pull-up three early in the shot clock, or for how much time they had left, and the three ends up going out. So the Spurs end up losing there. But again, they had a chance there to at least tie it or take the lead. San Antonio really struggled from outside with their outside shot, and Charlotte was big on the offensive glass with 14 rebounds and then 18 second chance points. The Spurs did get a strong game from Dylan Harper, though, who ends up with 20 points in just 3 quarters. He was having a really good game, but then he only played 1.5 minutes there in the fourth. One thing to note about this game is that the Spurs did change up their starting lineup. I had mentioned in the previous pod, if you listened, that I thought that it was time for, or eventually once Devin Vassell got back to the starting lineup, that maybe the Spurs should look at taking out Harrison Barnes and putting Julian Champagnie in there, or keeping him in the starting lineup. And sure enough, that's what the Spurs did. After the game, Coach Johnson did say it was more so for Devin's sake, to kind of get Devin back in the starting lineup. They just feel like he starts better games being a starter, but so they had Barnes come off the bench. So again, there's no guarantee that this is going to be the starting lineup for the rest of the season. But again, it was interesting that they made this move right now. And Stephon Castle has been out lately with left adductor tightness. So again, we'll see whenever Castle gets back if this remains the new lineup with Champagnie at the 4 and Barnes now coming off the bench. Then on Sunday, the Spurs were back home, and it was a tough way to get back home. So first of all, the Spurs couldn't fly back on Saturday night because of the snowstorm. So they end up staying in Charlotte. Then Sunday morning, they basically get on a flight out of Charlotte, but they have some plane issues. So then they have to land in Atlanta. They end up, I think, switching planes is what the story was. Then they finally get back to San Antonio. Well, because of how late they were, because of the short window that they were going to have to play the game, the NBA did at least delay the game for them to a few hours later. And so the Spurs and Magic did play there on Sunday. And this is actually a pretty good game for the Spurs. They were favored by 4.5. The Magic haven't been a very good team lately, as I had mentioned in the previous week's episode. And so the Spurs basically, led early. Orlando did come back in the second quarter, but then from there, San Antonio kind of pulled away in the fourth and won comfortably against the Magic by 9 points. Wemby had an all-star level night here with 25 points, 8 rebounds, 5 blocks, and a season-high 4 steals. I really the fact that he scored 14 points from dunk layup range and made 11 free throws made me interested in doing a piece about why was he able to do that. So I did some film work where I looked at how he really had some quick actions, attacking the Magic defense. He didn't really let them collapse on him, and also the fact that the Magic really wanted to have more bigs guarding him, like Wendell Carter Jr., Jonathan Isaac. And so after doing some research, I did see that in the 11 games when Victor scores, double digits right at the rim and dunk layup range, there's been 11 games. The Spurs are 9-2 in those games. A lot of those nights, it's against the it's against teams that elect to have the bigs guard him instead of having guards or wings defend him. And then the same thing for his free throws. When he gets those games where he makes 10 or more free throws, the Spurs are 6-2, and same story there. A lot of his defensive matchups on those nights are bigs, the traditional big men, either centers or power forwards. And so again, I think that's always going to be Victor's strength, where he's going to be able to score better in the paint against those type of teams when they give him that advantage of being able to actually go against a big man. Whereas the wings and guards, some of them, with the trapping and the doubles and triples, that really can make his night a little bit less efficient on some of those nights. And so Vegas said the Spurs should have gone 2-1 this past week. My prediction was they would go 2-1. I was wrong about the loss, though. I thought they would lose to Houston and then defeat Charlotte. Well, the reverse happened. But again, so they basically went according to expectations. The Spurs did go 2-1 this past week.
Let's keep going.
Tuesday afternoon, Victor was named the Western Conference Defensive Player of the Month for the month of January, where he averaged 8.2 defensive rebounds, 2.2 blocks, and 0.9 steals per game. Also, his team did very well on defense in the past month. They had the third best defense in January. The Spurs did, and of course, that's been they went 8-7, barely having a winning record in January. And again, a lot of the reason why they struggled was mainly because of their offense that had been struggling. Some news out of All-Star Weekend: Carter Bryant will be participating in the dunk contest. So after Stephon Castle participated last year, now it's going to be Carter Bryant's turn. Mitch Johnson will coach he's going to coach one of the All-Star teams because the Spurs on Sunday they were able to end up with the second seed out west, and the Denver Nuggets lost to the Thunder, which meant that the Nuggets were going to be third. And so because the Thunder head coach Mark Daigneault was the coach last year for the All-Star game, he can't be a repeat coach. So now it was Mitch Johnson's turn because the Spurs are in second. So Mitch Johnson is going to be coaching some of the future Hall of Famers and really good All-Stars for the what the NBA is calling the USA Stripes All-Star team. So this is going to feature Stephen Curry, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, Donovan Mitchell, Jaylen Brown, Jalen Brunson, and Norman Powell. So again, that's who Mitch Johnson will be coaching there at All-Star Weekend. Wemby, of course, because he's from France, he's going to be on the world team that features Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is going to probably be injured for that game, Denny Avdia, Luka Doncic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, and Pascal Siakam, and Karl Anthony Towns. So obviously, Victor's team is very stacked. It has like all the top guys for MVP here. Who is it? Like at least top three for sure. It's got SGA, Jokic, and Luka. Then you can go down the line. Giannis, Wemby in there. I think the only player who's going to be an All-Star, not All-Star, MVP candidate is Jaylen Brown, who's on Mitch Johnson's team. So again, Wemby's team is very stacked there at All-Star Weekend. All right, and finally, let's just look at the next 3 games for the Spurs. It's another slow week for the team. Not that many games, a lot more rest days involved here. But some back-to-backs. So in the last 10 games, the Spurs are 6-4, so they're playing 600 basketball. Their offense is ranked 15th in these last 10, and their defense is ranked 10th. So on Wednesday, they're hosting the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think this is for the 5th time. So the Thunder are 6-4 as well in their last 10. Better numbers ranking-wise. They have the 6th best offense during the stretch and 3rd best defense. I do want to say the Thunder are on the second out of a back-to-back, considering that they blew out the Magic on Tuesday. Because the game's in San Antonio, because the Spurs and Thunder are playing 600 basketball each, and and San Antonio is a good matchup against OKC. I'm going to go ahead and say that San Antonio wins this game. Then on Thursday, the Spurs have a back-to-back, so they have to immediately go to Dallas and play on Thursday. The Mavs are playing 500 basketball in these last 10, so they're 5-5. They have the 10th ranked offense during the stretch and 13th ranked defense. I know that on paper, I think I should pick the Spurs, but because of what happened recently in that Charlotte loss, I should just go with my gut instinct. I'm going to say the Spurs lose this game for a few reasons. One, I think that if they beat OKC, they're going to be on a high. They end up only losing to the Thunder once this entire season. Also, the fact that they blew out the Mavs on opening night, but I think it was 33 points. Maybe that's kind of a factor in the back of their minds. As much as they want to amp up for this Dallas team, who's missing, some players right now due to injury, like Anthony Davis, Kyrie Irving. Maybe they're just not there to get ready for this game, like they weren't against the New Orleans Pelicans game and some of those other losses recently for the Spurs. So again, I think it's more so a letdown by the Spurs, and so that's why I'm going to pick. I'm going to say that the Mavs win this game, although it wouldn't shock me, of course, if the Spurs win. And then the Spurs come back home on Saturday to host the Dallas Mavericks once again. And then this one, I'm very confident. I think the Spurs will beat Dallas at home. So again, my prediction is going to be 2-1. I think there's a letdown loss against Dallas, but it wouldn't shock me though if the Spurs go 3-0. I think this is a good week to possibly go 2-1 or 3-0 at worst.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spot Up Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spot Up Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening and have a great day.